I'm Kelly with Fujifilm Visualsonics. I'll be providing an instructional video on basic echocardiography. We'll be talking about parasternal long axis, parasternal short axis, and apical four-chamber imaging. The animal will start in this video already in a supine position, so if you haven't seen the animal setup video, please be sure to watch that. The imaging will be done on the Vivo 3100, but these methods also apply to the Vivo 2100 and the Vivo 1100. Today we are going to use the MX400 probe. Depending on the size of the mouse, you could also use the MX550 or even the MX201 or 250 if you're imaging rats. Place the transducer in the holder in the semi-locked position. If the notch is on the left side of the transducer, make sure that the notch on the screen is on the left side of the screen. In parasternal long axis, we'll begin with the notch facing towards us. Select the cardiology application. We'll be starting with parasternal long axis, so increase your image width, the image depth, and the depth offset to obtain a large field of view. To begin imaging the heart, we have to understand how the heart is sitting in the chest of the animal. So we know that the heart does not sit parallel in the animal like this. It actually is tilted more like it's coming from the animal's shoulder. In addition to sitting at this angle in the heart, the apex is also tilted up. So to counteract all of those different angles, we need to do two things. We tilt the table and we tilt the transducer. So to tilt the table, we release the lever on the base of the mouse platform and we tilt the table to the left and the feet down. Then we angle the transducer such that we're pointing towards the center of the animal, but also slightly toward ourselves. And then lastly, we rotate the transducer counterclockwise about 45 degrees so that we line up with that angle in the heart. Apply warm gel to the animal and lower the transducer until you make contact with the gel. When you look at your image on the screen, you can make gross adjustments by moving the base of the platform like this, or you can make small, minor adjustments using the X and Y micro manipulators. Some of the defining characteristics of a parasternal long axis picture include an open aorta on the right side of the screen, an aorta and apex that lie horizontal together on the screen, and a bit of right ventricle outflow tract that appears at the top. The reason we want the aorta and the apex to be flat on the screen is because typically we know we're going into short axis after we image this, and what short axis does is it's going to essentially drop a line down the center of the heart and appear as a circle on the screen. So if we were imaging short axis and the heart was tilted up, we'll be dropping a line almost like this at an angle. So we're going to end up overestimating the chamber volume. If they appear flat on the screen like this, then when you drop a line down the center, now you're bisecting the specific axis of the heart. We also, before we save this video, want to make adjustments to the image quality. So to do that, we're going to decrease our image depth because we really don't need all of this extra image on the screen. We're going to move our focal zone to the posterior wall, and we're also going to decrease our depth offset. Once you're satisfied with the image that you have, simply press Save Clip or Cinestore. Now we're ready for short axis. To image parasternal short axis, we simply turn the transducer 90 degrees clockwise, like this. Remember, this is 90 degrees clockwise to the position the transducer was in for parasternal long axis, not perpendicular to the axis of the mouse, but perpendicular to the axis of the heart. So what we see here is a short axis picture of the heart. This is left ventricle on the screen. We have right ventricle that appears on the left side of the screen, but it's hidden behind the sternum. This bright white that we see on the left, that's the top of the sternum that essentially shadows everything underneath it. This piece over here is a little bit of lung. And the defining characteristics of a short axis picture is that we have two papillary muscles in view and that they appear around 2 and 4 o'clock on the right side of the screen. Once we have a quality short axis picture, we can make image optimization changes. Those include changing the image width, and when we change the image width, that increases our frame rate. When we have a high frame rate image and everything is set, we're ready to save a V-mode picture. So we just press Save Clip or Cinestore. Once we're satisfied with the image optimization of the short axis, we're ready to take an M mode. To take an M mode, we just press M mode on the screen, and that brings up this yellow line. We want to position this line within the widest portion of the heart that's parallel to those papillary muscles. We also want to make sure that these two horizontal edges are outside of the ventricle. To do that, on the 3100, we can just use our finger on the tablet, but on the 2100 and 1100, it's called SV gate, for sample volume gate, on the keyboard. So once we've positioned it properly, we just press Start or Update, and that brings us to the M mode screen. What we're seeing here is motion of the heart over time, and we want to make sure that we can see the anterior wall and the posterior wall so that we can make measurements. If those appear clear to you, then we just save clip to save a few seconds of data and make our measurements. Once we're ready to image apical four-chamber, we need to adjust the platform again. To do that, we'll loosen the lever at the base of the platform, and we're going to tilt this back left corner all the way back and lock it. We're also going to aim the transducer as if we're aiming towards the animal's right shoulder or right ear, so that we're basically imaging along that same axis of the heart that we started at. We'll lower the transducer until it makes contact with the gel, and we'll go towards the screen. Apical four-chamber imaging is often the most challenging image within basic cardiovascular imaging. This is because we have a very small acoustic window in which to image the heart from apical view. So if I turn to the screen and I look at our apical four-chamber image, what I see on the right, this bright white, that's the lung. And on the left side, this area that's very dark is shadow that's caused by the sternum. So the acoustic window that we have in which to image is between the two, right here. And what we can see in that view is this area, which is the left ventricle, and underneath that is the left atria. The right ventricle and right atria are shadowed underneath the sternum. So essentially what we're seeing here is the heart is upside down because the ventricles are on top and the atria are on the bottom, and it's turned around because the left side is on the right side of the screen. What the most important part to notice here really is this bright white line that happens right around 11 millimeters on the screen. That bright white is where the separation between the ventricles and the atria is located. This is a visual indicator to you when you're looking for apical four-chamber that you're very close to where you need to image. Once you see this bright white line while you're imaging, you can use the X and Y micromanipulators to fine-tune the adjustments and make sure that you can see that atria underneath. So when we're imaging an apical four-chamber, what we want to look at really is blood flow that's coming from the atria into the ventricle. To look at blood flow, we need to use color Doppler. To turn color Doppler on the screen, I just press color. So color Doppler brings up this Doppler window, and what we're looking at here is we're looking at direction and velocity of blood flow. Anything that's labeled red is coming up towards the top of the screen or towards the transducer. Anything labeled blue is going away from the transducer or towards the bottom of the screen. We're also looking at velocity, so how red or how blue that signal is indicative of how fast that blood is moving. And we can adjust that velocity. So on the 3100, we use pulse repetition frequency, or PRF, to adjust the velocity. On the 2100 and 1100, we use simply velocity knob to adjust the velocity. So on the screen here, you can see that the upper and lower limits of my color Doppler are about 400 millimeters per second. If I turn the velocity or the PRF down, then I decrease that color velocity scale. And right away, you can see changes in what the color Doppler signal looks like. So all of a sudden, you see blue that shows up within the red area of the color Doppler signal. This is because the blood in that area, it's not that it's going all of a sudden in a different direction, it's that it reached, in this case, 272 millimeters per second, and it wrapped around the color wheel because it's going so fast. And that is called aliasing. Aliasing can be a good thing in Doppler imaging because it tells us where the highest flow is. And when we sample velocity, we only want to sample where that highest flow is. But if it wraps around too many times, then it's very hard to know where it's really high and where is slow. So there is an optimal setting for adjusting the velocity, but it's going to be dependent on the pathology and the species that you're using. So in this case, I really only want to see one area where it's wrapping around. I don't want it to wrap around everywhere. So I just move the PRF or the velocity to a point in which I only see one very smooth area of high velocity flow, like this. I also want to make sure that my color box is narrow and the height is wide. So what I'm looking for is a high frame rate for the color Doppler signal. So if I make the box really wide, then I'm going to lower the frame rate of the color signal. And since we're imaging in the heart, especially a mouse heart that beats so fast, we want a very high frame rate so we can follow the image on the screen. So I really do want this box to be very narrow, so I increase that frame rate. So once I have an area where it's aliasing and my box is narrow, now I'm ready to actually sample the velocity. So to sample the velocity, I use pulse wave Doppler, or PW. So I press PW on the screen, and it brings up my PW line. So I'm going to move this line to the center of that really hot spot, that spot where it's aliasing. And then I'm going to open my sample volume gate as wide as it can go. On the 3100, you can simply pinch to open this up. On the 2100 and 1100, this is called a sample volume gate, or SV gate, and you're going to toggle that open till it's really wide. I also want to adjust the pulse wave angle, or the PW angle on this, so that it matches the angle of flow. This is very important that we angle correctly here, because the angle at which we move this line will affect our values. So I just want to match the angle of blood flowing from the mitral, or from the left atria to the left ventricle. Once I'm satisfied, I just press start or update, and that brings me to the pulse wave Doppler mode screen. So what I'm seeing here is velocity over time. So anything above that zero line, positive velocity, is the red blood flow, the flow that's coming up towards the ventricle. This is blood flow that's flowing into the ventricle, so it's during diastole. Anything that's negative or beneath that line is blood that's labeled blue, flowing away from the transducer, and in this case, this is systole. So what I see in apical four-chamber, looking at mitral valve inflow, is I have an E peak and an A peak, or early and atrial filling. I can confirm this by comparing it to the ECG, that P wave. The E and A must saddle that P wave. That P wave on the ECG is atrial contraction, so it has to occur before the P wave, or I'm sorry, before the A wave. So what I can measure from here are things like EA ratio, and I can also do myocardial performance index. Once I'm satisfied, I simply press Save Clip to save for analysis later. After imaging pulse wave Doppler in apical four-chamber, we're now ready to image tissue Doppler. To image tissue Doppler, we need a very good B-mode picture of apical four-chamber. What we're basically going to do is we're looking at the velocity of tissue. So we're going to press tissue Doppler. That brings up a line that looks very similar to pulse wave Doppler, because essentially what we are doing is, instead of looking at the velocity of blood, we're looking at the velocity of tissue. And we're going to place this tissue Doppler on the mitral annulus. And the mitral annulus is the point at which the septal wall reaches the mitral valve, right in that corner. So we're going to use the widest portion of the sample volume gate, place it on that corner, and open up the gate very wide. Next, we're going to angle the pulse wave angle so that this angle points at the apex, just like this, and hit start. There's a visual indicator that we're in tissue Doppler, not pulse wave Doppler, because the image is yellow. So as opposed to pulse wave Doppler, where everything above the line was something that's coming in, blood flow coming in, now everything above the line is what happens during systole. Everything below the line is relaxation, the tissue moving out. Just like pulse wave Doppler, where we have an E wave and an A wave, we have similar waves in tissue Doppler, because every time blood flows into the heart has to move out to accommodate that blood. So what we see underneath the line in negative, which is the diastole, we see two very bright peaks. So we see two very strong peaks, but you see we have a very sort of dim peak right before. We've got a lot of things going on in this picture. What we can see is that dim one is actually isovolumic relaxation, and these two strong peaks are E prime because we're in tissue, and A prime. Then we have an area right after that, which corresponds to our isovolumic contraction time, and then a broad peak that's positive, and that's systole. We can confirm which peak is which by comparing it again to that ECG. So the P wave, because that's atrial contraction, must be sitting between the E prime and A prime waves on tissue Doppler. Often you'll see 4 peaks beneath the line, the isovolumic times and the E prime, A prime, and the only way to distinguish which one is which is to look at the two that saddle that P wave. So this is extremely important. And what we can measure from here is E prime, A prime, E prime to A prime ratio, and most importantly, E to E prime, which is a comparison of pulse wave Doppler to tissue Doppler. And once you're satisfied, just press Save Clip or Cinestore. This concludes our introduction to basic echocardiography. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any other questions about how to scan or anything that we can help you with, please go to our website at visualsonics.com under Resources and Contact Us, and one of our scientific application specialists will be happy to help you.